Fastomy, good afternoon and welcome into Perspective. Now, what many, including myself, thought would be a quick and pain-free Tynwald sitting turned into a 2.5-day marathon. Going into a third day used to be a rare occurrence, but they're seemingly becoming increasingly frequent with all manner of things on the agenda, ranging from Milan Vets and Castle Rushen High School all the way through to the Northwest Area Plan and the government halting debate to hold emergency talks after it became clear that it was likely Comyn was set for a second defeat in a single sitting over its handling of the MiCard termination. Now, did the government really underestimate their ability to convince Tynwald members that they'll sort it out while doubling down on the card's expiry? Or has it become too comfortable having extra ministerial votes and is now faced with the prospect of a stronger backbench vote? That's all coming up in Perspective with me, Christian Jones. We'll begin with Castle Rushen High School because its hoped work could start by the end of next year. The Department of Education, Sports and Culture claims a project manager has now been appointed and work on actual designs is underway. Now, the current building dates back to 1961. It served the community for more than 60 years. But for a decade now, the need for a new school building has become apparently clear to staff, children and MHKs alike. In 2021, a report found the site was no longer fit for purpose and a below-par environment for pupils to study. Money was set aside nearly 10 years ago for the build, £50,000 allocated for the initial design work, but despite being described as essential back then, the new build wasn't expected to be complete until 2023. Well, if we take a quick trip down to the south, you'll notice there still isn't a new school there, not even spades in the ground. But what we do have is the Education Minister Daphne Kane telling Phil Gawn that substantial progress is now being made.
We've had a very positive update in recent days. There is a design team and a project manager that have been appointed, and they bring an integrated consultancy team. They've been working on a comprehensive actual design, which is looking at the sizes and position of the school facilities. So it's really positive to report positive progress in delivering a replacement Castle Rushen High School for the south of the island.
Cynical observers of politics would say we've heard this all before. How realistic is it that this actual latest development is actually going to result in something tangible happening?
Well, I can take confidence from the fact the contractors appointed hold experience and a clear track record of building schools across the UK, and will be partnering with local contractors where they can. The point is that I think government has taken learnings over doing a very large capital project in terms of pinning down all the design elements ahead of going out for costing and building, and that's where we are. I won't deny that the timeline is very tight in order that we're hoping to bring this back for a vote to get on with the construction of the replacement Castle Rushen High School by next summer. But no, I think it's the most positive progress that we've had, and it is absolutely, we are on it to enable a replacement school to be delivered.
When will the public get to see what the new school is going to look like?
I would expect in the early part of next year, late January, February time, if all goes to plan. I would think that as opposed to a concept design that people saw a few years ago, this would be the actual school design.
One of the aspects is the inclusion of a new southern swimming pool. Is that likely to happen?
It's certainly in the spatial plan of plotting where all the various elements of the development go, and it's with the consultancy team who are busy drawing up the final design for the whole plot.
Daphne Kane there. So there is a chance we could see spades in the ground next year, although, as the Minister said, the timeline is very tight. But is this good enough for southern MHKs who will be only too aware they'll be taking to the streets, canvassing for the next general election before long? The Infrastructure Minister, Michelle Hayward, is also a Rushen MHK. I spoke with her alongside the Speaker, also a Rushen MHK, Juan Watterson.
I think when I was a backbencher, I would have agreed with the backbenchers about where we were up to. And at the time, Mr Watterson and I were putting pressure on the department to tell us where they were up to with the project and where it was moving. I'm delighted, since I've been in the position of minister, I've been able to have more influence and provide more support to the project management unit, and that actually things are moving at some considerable pace now.
At the government roadshows, you suggested there could be spades in the ground by summer next year. Do you think that's still plausible?
That's still the target we're working towards, yeah.
There have been some MHKs which previously threatened to not support the budget if there wasn't sufficient funding. Obviously a tricky question because you're a minister. I won't ask if you'll vote against the budget, but will you be pushing in Comyn to get sufficient funding for that?
I am. The Treasury have been involved on the way through this process anyway, so I am confident that we will move ahead at the pace that we've set, and that includes getting the funding. So we have to come back to Tynwald. Our aim is to come back by June 2026 to get the funding agreed. By that point, we'll have all of the designs done, we'll have planning through, and then we'll be able to start work.
And I'll come to yourself now, Mr. Speaker. Onken MHK Julie Edge seemed less than satisfied at the timeline for the Newcastle Rushen High School. Many of the southern MHKs were quite content with what the Education Minister had proposed and the time frame. Why do you think that is?
Well, certainly from my perspective, since we've had a change of personnel as Minister for Infrastructure and Minister for Education, I think we've seen a step change in the speed of this project. We really have seen the foot go onto the accelerator, and I want to commend those ministers for that. We have meetings as Southern MHKs on project progress, and I definitely get the feeling that now the Treasury Minister, the Education Minister and the Infrastructure Minister are all aligned in the common goal of getting this project built as soon as is realistically possible.
And similar question that I asked the Infrastructure Minister. Some southern MHKs have said they would vote against the budget. Do you think that's something you might be minded to do?
Well, I set myself, there were three things that I wanted to see in order to support the budget, and they were budget reform, which not quite there on that one, but Portsmouth Mary High Street and Castle Rushen High School are, I think, starting to move in the right direction. So we could be at a stage of 2 out of 3 by February, but watch this space.
Michelle Hayward and Juan Watterson. Well, in Tynwald this week, there were warnings that if cost proposals are delayed beyond June next year, the current administration would be unable to scrutinise them. But if all goes to plan, the proposals are set to go before politicians in the summer, which, if approved, could see work beginning in the second half of 2026. That's 10 years after the money was first set aside for the project. Now, a Douglas East MHK says Treasury isn't going far enough to deal with the dilapidated properties and derelict buildings on the island. Joni Farragher put forward plans to give local authorities new powers, allowing them to effectively fine landlords of properties that remained empty. Any off-island landlords could also face additional charges on their properties too. Now, we already know that Treasury is consulting about removing exemptions for derelict properties, including caps on the quarry rate, as well as a potential rebate schemes. Well, let's just bring ourselves up to speed, and we'll hear from Ms Farragher, who spoke with the Local Democracy Reporting Service before the Tynwald debate began.
We have to have data and more information to define what the issue is. And that's why they've done the Objective Assessment of Housing Needs, or the OAN. And it genuinely is a really good report. But in some ways, it tells us what we already know, which is that what we need is more homes available. So if we look at the census from 2021, that showed us that there are around 5,700 vacant properties, which is around about 15% of the island's housing stock sitting vacant. So I think this is one lever that we can use to free up homes for people. So the idea is to give our city and towns the ability to charge fees on vacant properties, which means that owners have a reason to rent or fix up or sell those empty buildings and sites, which means more homes for people who need them.
Joni Farragher there. Well, the motion was defeated, much to the disappointment of the Douglas East MHK, but also the leader of Douglas Council, Devon Watson, no doubt. Mr Watson said, quote, "The Isle of Man is on the front lines of the fight against poverty. The council deals with the consequences of inaction." So after the debate, I sat down with Ms Farragher to find out her reaction. I suppose you must be disappointed that it wasn't successful.
Very much so, yeah. I had thought that I would be able to convince more members, and I had thought that maybe the Council of Ministers might have brought forward an amendment that actually had some action in it, mainly because the issue of housing has been such a defining pressure for this administration and for obviously for the constituents across our island. It's what we all heard on the doorstep in the 2021 general election. It's what we were all elected on platforms of. So I really had thought that, considering that the perception certainly is that there's been very little movement on the issue of housing, very little action's been taken, I really did think that we would see an amendment that wasn't as neutralising and diluting as the amendment that we got, which was essentially a retention of the status quo. It doesn't do anything. So, yes, very disappointed, to sum it up, to be honest. Christian?
And there seems to be some reluctance to introduce some quite stringent disincentives, at least to the extent that you've put forward. Why do you think that is? Do you think there is reluctance?
Yeah, there certainly seems to be a reluctance. It is difficult to understand the reasoning because this is widely popular amongst people of the island. This is widely popular amongst local authorities. This is clearly something that communities are calling out for across the island. The fiscal drag of having derelict properties in people's neighbourhoods, the sort of eyesore nature of it, the way that it drags neighbourhoods down and the way that it impacts surrounding properties are things that we hear repeatedly about. So it's very confusing to me why people don't want to take action on this. It's a popular move. It would bring homes back into use. It would having a levy would also potentially bring money into local authorities' coffers. I'm just not understanding what the resistance is here. But I think this is something for backbenchers to take note of, that there were so many amendments. It was just a continual flurry and rustle of papers throughout that. It was difficult to focus on what people were saying, actually, because there was just a forest of amendments being doled out. And that confuses people and splits support. So, I do think that it's something that backbenchers need to take note of, that actually support for the original motion should be what we all kind of refer to as a backdrop, rather than support for the Council of Ministers amendment, which is what people seem to defer to when they're not sure, when there's been a plethora of amendments like that. So a learning point and, some discussion points, I think, for backbenchers in general. But it's just a very disappointing outcome.
Is this the end of the road for you, or do you think we might see an identical motion appear once we see the consultation responses about Treasury's rates exemptions?
Well, that was interesting that was even raised, because that consultation, as you've said, is regarding rates exemption. Yet the Treasury Minister seems to be implying that there would be responses on different issues, but it was a single issue consultation, so it's odd that the Treasury Minister presented it as that, and that was raised as something that could potentially bring some solutions to us, because it won't. However, I think I would consider. I'd need to gauge what the thoughts of fellow backbenchers and, of course, ministers are on this. I did try to work with the Treasury Minister. I know I referenced that in my speech, that I do appreciate his engagement, and that it was unfortunate that we hadn't really been able to come to an agreement in terms of wording.
Tynwald has rejected a proposal to create a new select committee to examine the island's financial services and e-gaming regulatory frameworks. It follows a debate dominated by concerns about the impact such a review could have on the Isle of Man's preparations for next year's MONEYVAL assessment. Douglas Central MHK Chris Thomas had sought the establishment of a committee to consider whether an independent inquiry was needed into the suitability of the island's regulatory, supervisory and policy arrangements following recent business closures, including Sultan Manx. His motion would have required the committee to take evidence and report back by May with recommendations on structure, scope, staffing and funding. Well, here he is, first speaking with Siobhan Fletcher, and this interview was recorded before the debate and the vote, but it should give an idea of what he's getting at.
What I'm saying is that for 4 or 5 decades, financial services has been absolutely crucial for the Isle of Man. And in the last 2 decades, e-gaming has come to be crucial as well. It employs lots of people, an important part of our national income. There are lots of people who provide services from legal, IT, just processing things for those sectors. So if we do have problems in those sectors, it's vital we talk about them rather than just pretending we don't have problems. And the other point is that traditionally there's been an objective in our law. The regulatory objective has included the maintenance of confidence in the island's financial services, etc., through effective regulation, supporting the island's economy and its development as an international financial centre. And people suspect that that's no longer got the importance that it used to have. It's been replaced by meeting international standards. So there are lots of people in the Isle of Man who are worried for their futures because the two largest sectors, financial services and e-gaming, seem to be under pressure.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of businesses sort of closing down in recent years, a lot of jobs on the line as well. Obviously, we have the MONEYVAL evaluation coming up next year. I mean, how do you think that factors into all of this as well? Do you think that essentially after that we'll see change, or do you think we need to get ahead of it? Like, where does that factor in?
Well, I think we need to be talking about what MONEYVAL is likely to conclude, and we also need to be talking about now what we're doing for MONEYVAL. So the simple fact is that between 2019 and 2023, our national income, the total value of what's going on in our island economically, declined in real terms. For 3 consecutive years, it declined. In Jersey, it didn't. In real terms, Jersey managed to hang on. For 6 months or so, behind the scenes, I've been challenging things like the national risk assessment and who produced it, and are we doing everything based on what a small group of people have said is necessary, rather than necessarily what everybody would think was in the national interest, because we're making choices that we might not need to be making. So I noticed that a leading advocacy firm in the Isle of Man wrote to members of Legislative Council raising some questions about some changes that were being made in conjunction with the consultation at the beginning of the summer on financial services regulation and e-gaming regulation. So I decided to put this motion down on the register 2 or 3 months ago, and what's amazed me is how little government has talked about it and how little government has been in touch with me about it. It's an incredibly important motion. I've been very conservative in the way I've put it down, because what I'm calling for is a committee to be set up to actually evaluate whether we need an independent inquiry, and if so, when, what form, and the like. I have had letters and emails since I put the motion down to say, you wouldn't believe how my life has been ruined over the last year. The suggestion that people worry about what's at the back of my filing cabinet and the paperwork being indexed properly rather than the big picture stuff. So I've been getting those messages. I've also been getting messages from 1 or 2 people in banking to say, it's putting pressure on our business. But the overall ethos seems to be we've got to do whatever government's proposing for the MONEYVAL assessment. And there's just this vague talk about 10% off national income if we don't do well in the evaluation. But the simple fact is, in the last 3 or 4 years, we've lost more than 10% of our national income already. So we need to be very careful about the choices we make. Last week in Keys, we were talking a bit about the gambling legislation, and I made the point that the international standard didn't say exactly what we'd said it said in our legislation. So we have choices about how we interpret these things.
Chris Thomas, well, an amendment from the Justice and Home Affairs Minister Jane Paul Wilson replaced the proposal with a government-led statement of principles and ultimately won the support of Tynwald. That government-framed amendment reaffirmed the importance of economic growth, independent regulation and maintaining the island's international reputation, while highlighting the contribution of the financial services and e-gaming sectors. It also stressed the shared priority of securing a positive MONEYVAL outcome in 2027. During the debate, ministers and MLCs warned against introducing additional processes that they believed could send the wrong signal internationally, especially at a crucial time. The Chief Minister, Alfred Cannon, described the original proposal as unhelpful, saying the island faced a rigorous evaluation and needed certainty, not distractions. And Legislative Council member Gary Clewett cautioned that confidence was at stake, warning that grey listing was not symbolic, but in fact economically damaging. MLC Gary Cluett, thanks so much for joining us. For those that are unaware and may not follow this area particularly closely, how would you explain what MONEYVAL actually assesses and why it matters?
Well, thanks for inviting me, Christian. MONEYVAL is the Council of Europe's arm for evaluating financial crimes and terrorist financing. It's tied in with the FATF, basically the global watchdog that looks out for financial crimes and anti-terrorist financing. It's become a big, big push. I mean, the reality is that the greatest growth industry on the planet at the moment is financial crime, money laundering. There's a fair amount of terrorist financing, and all of that money has to be washed somehow, has to be cleansed. I saw a disturbing report a couple of days ago that something like, and again, it's an estimate nobody probably will ever know, but that up to 40% of the hundreds of billions of pounds or dollars that have been poured into Ukraine have sort of disappeared. But there's organized crime, there's all sorts of things that are pervasive, and the problem is once that money has been successfully laundered, it then enters into the mainstream. It enters into our corporations, via shareholders or outright acquisitions. So it's a significant issue of sort of holding jurisdictions to account. Right now, there are over 200 separate jurisdictions that have signed up for MONEYVAL and FATF because there is a global concerted effort to control this. And of course, many small nations have set themselves up as international finance centers, and because of slightly lesser regulations, have also been very attractive to the e-gaming or just the online gambling industries. These are the two areas that are of the most concern to regulators and law enforcement around the world. So those being significant components of the Isle of Man economy, they draw close scrutiny.
And that's the thing. People who do launder money and these big criminal networks, they are extremely clever, and they're always several steps ahead of the game, aren't they?
Yes, I mean they deploy technology, they deploy they have resources. So, for example, in the recent past, we've heard a lot about King Gaming, and I certainly don't know all of the details, but what I do know is that was a multinational crime syndicate that operated in something like 50 countries, or possibly even more than 50 countries, and that their monthly turnover, exceeds the entire budgets of the Gambling Supervision Commission here, the FSA, our law enforcement, and our court systems. I mean, we're outnumbered with small jurisdictions. So it takes time. But the fact that they got taken down, to me, says that it's working. Our jurisdiction is working. Now, I don't speak for. I have no authority to speak for the FSA or even the Treasury. I mean, these are entirely my views. But when I was looking to semi-retire, again, and we were looking for somewhere to move because we'd lived in the United States for 30 years. And we decided as a physical location to live was the Isle of Man. It is a lovely place. We love it here. But the other consideration was that I still have, I've got rid of most of my corporate end things, but I still have a company that I've had for 30-odd years that is still a reasonably good-sized business, and I will continue that business until the last few of my employees actually retire. Everyone that I have left has been working for me for over 25 years, and I will not put them out of work at their advanced ages because they'll never work again. But the reality is, when I looked to moving the company to the Isle of Man, one of the first things I looked at was, well, how well a regulated economy and country is this? Because my business has always encompassed, my customers are essentially from the Global 2000 companies, heavily financial industries. So some of the biggest banks in the world, insurance companies, are our customers. Some of the huge government departments around the world are our customers. And the issue is, if I moved the company to a jurisdiction that was not considered entirely legitimate and above board in every respect, those companies would no longer be able to do business with me, especially the financial industries. They're under incredible regulation right now. European banks are, I know we have people here who complain about regulation and things, but dealing with European banks is incredibly difficult right now, and the regulations just keep being piled on. We're now under, because we're providing software to these companies, to these global systemically important banks that have to satisfy European regulators and things that they can, for business continuity, cyber risks and things like that. And even as we're a relatively small company, we have to deal with all of that. We have no choice. It's you either play the game or you get out of it. So I did, we moved the company over here in 2018, but what I did as part of the research on the Isle of Man before deciding that was looking at the MONEYVAL reports from 2016. Now, there's 50, FATF publishes a set of 50 sort of guidelines that they expect jurisdictions to adhere to. And at that time, I believe in the 2016 thing, if I recall correctly, the Isle of Man had met 49 out of the 50. The 50th one was that I believe we hadn't done a national risk assessment into terrorist financing, which is now being completed. That was kind of the big outstanding thing at that evaluation. So, I was reasonably comfortable in relocating the business here. Now, I own the business. I have no shareholders. I have no outside directors. I don't have a board to satisfy. So in the grand scheme of things, I'm a tiny, tiny, tiny business. And those things concern me. When you look at bigger corporations that have public investors, shareholders, external boards and things, the bar is very, very high. And none of them can afford to deal with any jurisdiction anymore that is less than, I won't say perfect, but it's close to perfect. And this is the greatest fear I have, is that somehow we end up on special measures, or worse, grey listed. I have spoken. I know politicians and business people in several jurisdictions that have been grey listed, including one that was blacklisted, and it is whatever problems anyone thinks we might have in our economy today. I mean, it pales into insignificance compared to what would happen to us. And not only that, but we've got a couple of fairly big companies operating on the island. Especially we're sort of one of the leading jurisdictions for captive insurance markets and things like that. And if we were to be downgraded by MONEYVAL, all of that could be in jeopardy. Which is jobs, it's revenue, it's the economy would just take a nosedive. I think the FSA estimates that it could be about 10% of our economy. I think that would be best case. It could be a lot worse. So it's just not something to play around with. I mean, I spoke in Tynwald this week. I'm not against us looking at how we operate and various things like that. But what I've been told directly by people in other jurisdictions, Guernsey and Jersey, I think it was Guernsey was last year and things, is that one of the things that the MONEYVAL assessors look at is essentially the unity is everyone on the same page? Is everyone, understands and has common purpose in terms of making sure that we do this? So that means, it means business, the regulators, it means Parliament, and everybody. Are we all in agreement that this is the way forward and the will of, essentially the will of the nation, I suppose, in one respect.
And you've spoken about how when you were moving from the US over to here, the sorts of things you were looking for. But now you're sitting in Legco. Have your perspectives changed at all? Is there anything you see differently from inside Tynwald compared to from an industrial perspective?
I guess I hadn't appreciated the level of complexity and difficulty and sophistication of what we're up against. You go to briefings, you talk to people in the Gambling Supervisory Commission and the FSA, and it's daunting. On the other hand, as I said, I did a fair amount of due diligence before deciding to relocate the company. But pretty much everything I have seen since I entered Legco and Treasury, because both those two regulators are part of fall under Treasury, actually has increased my confidence that we are in fact we are a very well regulated jurisdiction. And I know people complain about it. There are noises about, we're over-regulated and things. And, just in some respects, I think we're over-regulated. But the reality is we want to be an international finance center. We want to be players on the international scene. And that comes with a cost. And that cost is compliance. And to me, it's annoying and it's expensive, but it is a price worth paying for the privileges that it grants us.
Because, like you said, these major organisations, they're not looking for anything less than perfect, really.
They can't afford to. It's as I say, it's not only about shareholders and directors; it's about public relations, customers. If customers think the company's dodgy, it has an adverse effect on their business model.
Well, one thing Chris Thomas said was that he'd been contacted by businesses, or that businesses were raising concerns to him about the regulatory climate. Do you think it's possible to acknowledge those concerns without undermining preparations for MONEYVAL?
I think it is, but you also have to look at who is raising the complaints. Right? From what I've seen and been told, a number of the people that are most vocal about over-regulation things are people who have been fined by the FSA. So they've been caught, and now they're unhappy. There's that aspect. And people have been caught, and that are never going to be happy. Now, I don't say it's in all cases. I honestly don't have first-hand knowledge of that. But the FSA has been, and the talk about them being over-regulators and things like that, quite frankly, the FSA and the gambling supervision bills that are coming, I will be taking them through Legislative Council when they get to us. We're actually playing catch up. Okay, there is disquiet in the industry on the island about the imposition of penalties and fines on individuals like the compliance officers and things, which we don't have. Competitive jurisdictions have had those on the books for 20 years. Some of them even have criminal penalties, which we're not contemplating at the moment. So we're not leading here. In fact, we're almost playing catch up. And if you look at the penalties, I actually have, I brought along a list just in case it was asked. I have a list of every penalty that's been imposed by the FSA since 2019. There was 1 in 2019, 5 in 2020, 1 in 2021, 3 in 2022, 4 in 2023, 4 in 2024, and 3 in 2025 thus far. It's not a huge amount. And you look at the amounts vary all over the place, because one of the things in terms of the penalty regime, it is to some extent based on your turnover. So little companies, if they are fined, face fairly, in terms of physical amounts, the fines are fairly small. Big companies get fairly hefty fines. But then when you look at the fines that have been levied in Jersey, Guernsey, Malta, the Caymans, and things, we are on the lower end. And the other thing is, most companies who get fined, invariably it's not their first run-in. I suppose if something is found even on the first inspection and it's totally egregious, and a deliberate attempt to thwart the system, you may get more than a rap on the knuckles first time around. But the other interesting statistic that I did pick up from things is that, so in 23-24, the FSA conducted 725 inspections. Of those, 5 matters were referred to enforcement intelligence for possible investigation, and 3 were to enhanced supervision. In 24-25, there's only been 296 inspections, 8 matters referred to enforcement and intelligence for investigation, and 1 matter to enhanced supervision. So
why do you think there have been fewer and a high percentage?
The cynics will say because we're losing all the businesses. Well, no, there is in the e-gaming, there has been some loss of business. I don't think that's really true in the these are FSA numbers, not gambling numbers. I think companies are cleaning up their act, and will continue to do so, which is a good thing for our reputation. I mean, in fact, ideally, you'd be down to, we are in terms of in being referred for investigation, and even on putting them in special enhanced supervision, the numbers are down quite substantially. On the e-gaming side, we've lost, but the industry has changed. And I was talking to one of the regulators a short while ago, and in the run-up to the 2016 MONEYVAL assessment, we apparently lost 32% of the e-gaming businesses then. I think some of them came back. Whether they'll come back now, I don't know, because those assessments worry a lot of companies, I suspect, and some may decide to leave, and chance their arm coming back at some point. But the fact is that the e-gaming industry has changed significantly in the last 3 or 4 years. It is changing. A lot of it is moving east. There are other jurisdictions opening up, like Curacao, just off South America, and Belize, and several Asian countries that potentially are picking up business because it's a new industry for them. Therefore, almost by definition, their regulatory regimes are going to be a lot less mature, and their regulations a lot less stringent than ours.
I think it was only last year that Curacao was effectively abandoning their whole gambling license and reissuing them because they were not technically government owned at that point.
Correct. It is a problem, and for a new jurisdiction going into it, the other thing you have to be very, very cautious about is that these organizations that are in, the criminal organizations, cartels, triads, whatever, have extremely deep pockets, and and in jurisdictions where bribery and corruption are a lot more rampant than anywhere that we're familiar with. So they can buy regulators and politicians and whoever the things and do. I mean, so but as I say, e-gaming has always been fraught, and the other thing is it has no absolute need for any physical nexus. It can move in a heartbeat. I mean, I've always said whether it's here, Gibraltar, Malta, any of the e-gaming kind of centers, if the United States did one simple thing, and that is allow e-gaming, every one of them would be there within probably 6 weeks. They'd abandon us, and they go, because there's a huge untapped market there.
Right.
But I guess that's where that's where it. As I say, I am comfortable where we are in the world. I know some people in the industry don't like it. I don't like the regulatory regimes I'm under in dealing with European banks. But it's a decision you have to make. Do you want to do this or you don't? You play by the rules or you basically get out the game.
One thing I thought was very interesting that you mentioned in Tynwald was that inspectors will literally go through everything. They'll go through Hansard, they'll go through media reports.
Yeah.
It really is that meticulous.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that they're going to be sitting down, but they're certainly, probably feeding our answer through ChatGPT and looking for the keyword MONEYVAL or something like that. I mean, they do have a reputation of doing that. They are very, very thorough. And, I am absolutely convinced, based on something else I've been told, is that, when because they know we're in an election year, promises are being made.
Right.
By candidates, some of whom might get elected, and so their concerns will, you've said this. What is that? How does that impact us?
Okay.
As we're coming in, because there'll be a new administration, a new Tynwald, and Keys coming in September, October next year, fresh, full of ideas, and right in the midst of the MONEYVAL on-site inspections. So they're going to be paying very, very close attention to what is being said and what legislation is going to be proposed in the early days of a new administration.
Would that be a bit of a reality check for any new MHKs that come through?
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, it's really easy to say things when you're electioneering, and then the reality hits you when you do get elected. You get in there, and suddenly it's like, oh, well, this is not quite what I thought it is.
Well, let's just conclude. I mean, since being an MLC, your perception seems to have improved of at least the Isle of Man system. So do you think that the Isle of Man has a reasonable chance of performing well in MONEYVAL?
I do.
Okay.
Unless we do something silly.
Okay.
I actually think that we are in very good shape compared to, and again, I've spoken to several politicians in some of these other jurisdictions who've recently been through MONEYVAL. They're not the regulators, not things like, but these are just from their political perspectives, and what some of their concerns were going into their MONEYVAL inspections, and they came out with flying colours. They passed, which I suppose is flying colours, and some of the concerns that they expressed to me, that their concerns going into that, I don't share. I don't think we have those same concerns yet. So I'm actually quite confident that we're well placed, and that hopefully we'll get there.
Now, when I say MiCard to you, what does that mean? Well, if you're a MiCard holder, it's probably how you collect your pension or benefits. And it was about a year ago the government first floated the idea they would be making them redundant, and instead the funds would be sent straight to bank accounts. Not everyone has a bank account, though, and the latest figures we know of, at least, there are 729 people who would perhaps be in a sticky situation if MiCard was withdrawn because they don't have an alternative. So when Tynwald was asked to instruct the government to extend the scheme and Treasury tried to request more time, it didn't go down so well in the chamber.
I honestly don't think that I could go to my constituents, look them in the eye and say, don't worry, Tynwald is looking after you.
It is not acceptable Treasury Minister, look after the vulnerable people on the island. Wake up.
And the level of incompetence on display right now, saying, no, don't worry, we're still finalising details. I absolutely can't believe that they've had the absolute gall to stand up and say, I promise everything will be okay.
He has inadvertently unleashed a level of chaos previously unseen, which was entirely preventable. And therefore he has created an unnecessary level of uncertainty and anxiety amongst the most vulnerable people.
And I think the Chief knows that if we haven't got something on the table tomorrow morning, not only will we turn it down, the headline on the paper next week will not be the MiCard, it will be the departure of the Treasury Minister from his job under pressure, because this is so important. They've had over a year to sort it and it hasn't been done. And you can read the room, which we haven't done lately. It has not been sorted. It needs to be sorted.
But it took the final 15 hours and the threat of another government defeat for the Council of Ministers to return to the drawing board and produce an alternative. Backbenchers have welcomed the move and, as we just heard, did not hold back in their criticism. But they're also clear that this is not a long-term answer. Arbury, Castletown and Malou MHK Jason Morehouse first pressed ministers on the matter a little over a year ago and maintains his concern it was down to the wire.
Shouldn't that have been done weeks ago when we knew there were issues? So I'm really concerned that we have got a short-term solution, but the next big issue is going to arise after the next election. So it's been a case of passing the buck on and seeing what the next group of people do, which I don't feel is a correct solution to a problem that's been ongoing for so long.
Well, why do you think it took some quite strong comments for Coleman to realise that they're actually in trouble here?
Just in terms of reality, it hit. The ministers suddenly realised that if they waited another month, there's going to be a real crisis. It was a case of what do we do at that point? So it's fortunate in a way that we had this debate at this point, so they had the chance to actually do something. But in terms of doing something, we've just rolled the ball forward.
Douglas East, MHK, Joni Farragher. Your MiCard motion caused quite a stir. Did you expect that?
I knew that there was a high level of support and I knew that there was a high level of feeling among members. But what I didn't expect was the Council of Ministers' request to adjourn and then the subsequent kind of climb down amendment, I suppose, is what I would call it. Although I must give the Council of Ministers some respect and an acknowledgement of the fact that they have essentially U-turned on this, and that is because there was such a strength of feeling in the room. They finally read the room.
Do you think Coleman underestimated what a dominant force the backbench vote can be when it's united?
Yeah, when the backbenchers do actually decide, look, we need to see action here, as you've acknowledged, they are a dominant force. They are a very powerful force in that court, and you can see the shift actually in energy when the Council of Ministers suddenly realise that their amendment won't be supported, and I would just urge all of my fellow backbenchers to resist neutralising Council of Ministers amendments. If the Council of Ministers just admitted that they don't support the intent of the motion and voted against it, and the fact that they don't want to vote against it shows that they know that they should really be supporting that motion, and they know that it's going to look bad that they didn't. So they put in an amendment that completely neutralises it. And I think that the backbenchers need to resist that a lot more than we currently do.
So, with Treasury now granted an extra 12 months of breathing space, or possibly less, as these cards will outlast the current administration, does the minister accept that the government's handling of the fallout was too lax?
What's been seen in this sitting of Tynwald is some real concerns from people representing their constituents about this. From a government perspective, we're responding to those calls from Tynwald members to continue the system, to continue the work that we've been doing to develop alternatives for it as well, but manage that transition over a longer time period.
And why was it in the last 15 hours that suddenly a solution was found? Because this issue is not a new one. It has been raised to government time and time again.
We've had a number of solutions that have been going through commercial negotiations with various bodies, including the Isle of Man Post Office. It was quite clear yesterday with the strength of feeling in Tynwald and the demands. So we've re-engaged with the Isle of Man Post Office to make absolutely certain that could be delivered in time, and they've confirmed that.
Yesterday, you were talking about demands. There were calls for your resignation if a solution couldn't be found.
I think yesterday there was a lot of concern. There was a lot of anger from some people. And there was the statement that Treasury and, in fact, wider government wasn't listening. Government and Treasury have been listening. We have been trying to work and engage with all those people affected. And what I think we've shown is that we obviously appreciate the will of Tynwald and will respond to that in the right way to make sure that those people who rely on the MiCard for getting their benefits continue to be able to depend on that, but also are engaged with and helped to manage their finances in a more suitable and resilient long-term way.
So potentially the next administration's first task will be either ensuring a smooth transition of MiCards to a new system or gearing up to defend against some potentially feisty backbenchers. Well, that's all for Perspective. Phil will be back with you next week. So until next time, take care. Bye-bye for now.